was not a small task. So our heartfelt appreciation goes out to the entire conference planning committee who've been working for the past year on putting this conference together. And it's chaired by ENRS President-elect Dr. Anne Marie Morrow, and has been supported by our management company, our management team at ACG. They have truly worked tirelessly to ensure the success of our meeting today. I would also like to extend my gratitude for the generous financial support of our annual sponsors, for their contributions have been critical to delivering our meeting today. We're forever grateful for their ongoing support, especially during this unprecedented challenge. Thanks also to, on the first slide, we recognize our annual sustaining partners, Boston College, New York University, Myers College of Nursing, and University of Connecticut School of Nursing. We see on the second slide our annual supporting partners. And on the third slide are listed our annual partners. Now it's my honor to present the annual awards. The Distinguished Contributions to Nursing Research Award recognizes sustained and outstanding contributions to nursing research by a senior investigator. And this year, we're pleased to present this award to Dr. Gail Diaramo-Malkus. Dr. Malkus is the Florence and William Downs Professor in Nursing Research and Vice Dean for Research at NYU Roy Myers College of Nursing. Dr. Malkus has had a distinguished career in nursing research that has focused on development and testing of diabetes self-management and care interventions that are aimed at improving health disparities among vulnerable populations. Her robust program of research addresses the quality and effectiveness of these interventions while also serving as a training ground for clinical practice in nursing research. For over 30 years, Dr. Malkus has been consistently funded from private foundations, corporations, and NIH to build this program of research that has advanced the state of the science and simultaneously provided a platform to build and mentor research teams. Her most notable award, recent award I should say, is her P20 Center at the NYU Myers College of Nursing, focused on precision health in diverse populations. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Malkus's distinguished career and her commitment to improving health outcomes and preparing the next generation of nurse scientists. She is truly deserving of this prestigious ENRS Distinguished Contributions to Nursing Award. The Susan Feedham Nurse Scientist Family Research Award is given annually in recognition of outstanding contributions by a nurse scientist with a program of family research and scholarship. Dr. Diane D. Tomaso, an assistant professor at the College of Nursing and University of Rhode Island's research, has focused on human lactation and infant weight with a long-term research goal to establish more accurate patterns of infant growth and improve feeding recommendations. She has received numerous awards for this work that significantly impacts the care of childbearing families. Again, please join me in congratulating Dr. T. Tomaso on her family researcher scholarship that has great potential to positively impact families throughout our region, the United States, and the world. The Rising Star Research Award this year, it recognizes Dr. Ariana Chow. This award, established in recognition of promise of an establishing program of nursing research, is awarded to Dr. Chow, who's an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Her research interests include identifying biobehavioral mechanisms related to binge eating and obesity, and developing innovative ways to improve the treatment for these conditions. She has an impressive history of research funding as an early investigator and an impressive publication record. So she truly, as one of her mentors wrote, embodies precisely the most optimal contribution and combination of scholarly productivity, research skills, and outstanding potential for future contributions. Our ENRS Nurse Research Authorship Award goes to Eileen Condon at the Yale School of Nursing. Dr. Condon is a postdoctoral associate at Yale School of Nursing, and her work focuses on biobehavioral approaches to understanding intergenerational transmission of childbirth adversity and protective factors. Her paper, entitled Maternal Adverse Childhood Experiences, Family Strengths, and Chronic Stress in Children, examined these associations and is published in Nursing Research, Volume 68, Issue 3. The ENRS, Council for the Advancement of Nurse Science, CAN's Dissertation Award, is presented to Mr. Ji Chen, a doctoral student at the University of Connecticut School of Nursing. Mr. Chen is the Virginia Stone Fund Scholar of the American Nurses Foundation. His long-term research plan is to develop a comprehensive understanding, biobehavioral, and multi-omics mechanisms of pain and pain self-management. We look forward to hearing more about Mr. Chen's research results in future ENRS scientific sessions. I'm pleased also to present the 2020 Evidence-Based Practice Award to Dr. Terry Jabali. Dr. Jabali is a clinical inquiry specialist in the Cancer Center at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. She facilitates evidence-based practice within the SPAWN model, which is an acronym developed by Dana-Farber Cancer Institute for Science and Practice Within Nursing. As an advanced practice nurse, an educator, and a nurse scientist, Dr. Jabali has focused on the understanding and promotion of evidence-based practice in nursing education and practice. She's receiving this award for her project that developed and tested a psychoeducational intervention for patients with colorectal and pancreatic cancer undergoing treatment. Now we'll have a chance to applaud each of these award recipients when we're together in person next year in Philadelphia. In the meantime, when you see them across your travels in the next year or see them at your own institutions, please offer them a note of congratulations. And now please join me in congratulating them all with a virtual bravo. So a few housekeeping notes for our attendees throughout the conference. If you have any questions during this session for the speaker or for any of our session speakers, please send those questions via the Q&A function. If you are having a problem with your technology, you can send those to a chat via the chat function to our ENRS colleagues, and they will help you to troubleshoot. Now there's going to be a brief survey at the end of each session. This will help you to receive the CEU credits. So please make sure you take a moment and fill that out at the end of the, each of our sessions today. Our scheduled keynote speaker, Dr. Suzanne Miyamoto, is unable to join us today. She's under the weather, so we urged her to take good care of herself so that she can quickly be back to her important role as CEO of the American Academy of Nursing, a role in which Dr. Miyamoto directs the internal operations to help the organization achieve its mission, vision, and strategic plan. This is particularly important, as you'll hear shortly, in this time and challenge of COVID-19. At a later date, we will provide Dr. Miyamoto's keynote presentation as part of our presentation library. We are very grateful to have Dr. Eileen Sullivan Marks, the Dean of NYU Myers College of Nursing and President of the Academy of Nursing, to joining us today. We have asked Dr. Sullivan Marks to talk with us about the Academy's response to COVID-19. She'll give us some comments and then answer some questions. So remember to send them via the Q&A function. It is truly my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Sullivan Marks. Eileen Sullivan Marks is Dean of the NYU Rory Myers College of Nursing and the Erling Perkins McGriff Professor of Nursing. She is a renowned nurse leader, educator, and clinician known for her work on innovative approaches to primary care and payment methods for nurses, particularly through Medicaid and Medicare. Dr. Sullivan Marks holds fellowships in the Gerontology Society of America and the New York Academy of Medicine. From 2010 to 2012, she was an American Political Science Congressional Fellow and Senior Advisor to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Dr. Sullivan Marks was the first nurse to serve as the American Nurses Association representative to the American Medical Association's Resource Board Relative Value Update Committee, where she was able to demonstrate that the work of nurse practitioners and physicians can be valued equally through these payment structures. She has received numerous awards, including the Hip Install Founders Awards for Excellence in Practice, the Doris Schwartz Gerontological Nursing Research Award, and she's the recipient of the Distinguished Alumni of the University of Rochester School of Nursing and the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Dr. Sullivan Marks assumed the presidency of the American Academy of Nursing in October, where she's both a fellow and an edge runner. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sullivan Marks, who I think we'll all agree is very well positioned to be a true voice of nursing. Dr. Sullivan Marks.
Good morning. I guess I'm not sure if my face will show up during this, Vicki, do you know? Oh, there I am. Hello, everyone. Good morning. And I see that we have nearly 100 people on, so congratulations to the Eastern Nursing Research Society for this achieving your mission of revolutionary power of nursing science, because I believe that you are one of the first, if not the first, to take a conference virtual in very short order from the moment that we realized that gathering together would not be scientific at all. And so here we are. I am happy to speak with you on behalf both of the American Academy of Nursing and the nurses of New York and New York City and surrounding areas, because at this moment, indeed, we are under siege of the pandemic. It's been an amazing and challenging journey for all of us throughout the world, and as well in the United States now. And I send condolences to many families and friends who've been both losing members of their circles to the COVID-19 disease, as well as to those who are separated from loved ones during this pandemic. What I thought I might do is talk a bit about my own particular leadership journey during this time, both as Dean at the School of Nursing, President of the Academy, and this year I also happen to be chairing the NYU Dean's Council, which has put me in a leadership position at NYU for addressing the COVID-19 around the world. So let me just explain that a little bit. NYU is a global university. We have 15 sites around the world, 3 of which are degree granting sites: our NYU campus in New York City, Shanghai, and Abu Dhabi. And as we know, the COVID virus began probably late December, but certainly through January in Hubei province in China, in the city of Wuhan. Our NYU 1,400 students at our NYU Shanghai site had not yet started classes because they were ready to start classes right after the Lunar New Year. So they were starting a week or 2 late. So before they began, China responded to the virus with restrictions in social isolation, or for social isolation restrictions and coming together. And so we quickly, back in February, had to move our NYU Shanghai students to remote learning, and indeed move the students out of their living space and have them return. Now, 50% of those students are from China and 50% are from other parts of the world. So I say that because as a leader in nursing, I found myself learning a great deal in detail about the COVID-19 virus and what the real living and daytime effects of it would be before it came to the United States. So one of the things I want to share with you today is that those of you in the ENRS world are increasingly feeling the effects of this in our lives and in our hospitals. But what I have noticed about the response to this epidemic and pandemic, and this is a human response, is almost like what you go through with grieving in the Kubler-Ross stages. First, no matter where what professional scientific knowledge you have, or what you think about the disease, or whether you are a health professional or not, is denial. And denial always slows us down. This is true in any emergency, that first it's like, oh, is it really that bad? Oh, it's just influenza. And I went through that myself. Is it really that bad, or is it unique to China? Is it really going to travel around the world? And but quickly, as you gather the facts, you move through, denial and anger and bargaining. Well, maybe if we just do a little bit of this, and maybe if we do that, well, why are they making us do this? And I could see that happening among the professional leaders at the university, among students, among faculty, and in myself. And so I think that the self-reflecting that we do as nursing is so important at this time, because if we don't do that type of reflection as we confront this, we won't get to the decision-making that we need to get to be challenged by it and to meet the challenge. And what do I mean by that? I found myself at one point just being a little bit annoyed by it all, and oh, I have more meetings to go to and this sort of thing. And then I found myself, well, if we do this or we do that, maybe we can accommodate this. What if I have to go remote? And I found that as I went through those stages, I was ahead of my faculty, I was ahead of the staff. Vicki could attest to this. And I started pushing a task force. And once it reached Europe, I put a task force together and raised more alarms and how we needed to be prepared. I then found myself becoming, as we implemented the need to go remote, and thinking differently about how we were going to address COVID during our spring break, which was a month ago, it seems, probably several weeks ago. A profound sadness and sense of loss. If we all left our building, which we have, if we aren't seeing each other, I'm going to feel that I've lost something. And I allowed myself to feel that sense of sadness and loss for an evening, and said, if I don't go through this stage, I won't get to where I need to be as a leader to be making decisions with both my head and my heart. So it's those stages that you have to allow yourself to go through. And we always, in epidemics, as our leaders tell us in epidemiology, you're 2 weeks behind. Well, we're many more than 2 weeks behind. So for those of you out there who know that we need to do something different in our communities, it's a matter of us as nurses convincing the public that yes, indeed, following social distancing and social isolation is important flattening the curve is helpful, but what is more helpful is thinking about what each of us is in this epidemic, and that is both we are victims and we are vectors. And keeping the duality of that concept in our mind is quite difficult. Secondly, another lesson learned that has been helpful to me and may be helpful for you if you've studied organizational dynamics and leadership, and you know that usually in your mind as a leader, or even as you all are as researchers, you have a theoretical framework. And those frameworks will change with each situation you might find yourself in, just as a research question may change theoretically for you. You find a different theory to help you guide your inquiry. One of the things in a situation like this that helps me is the VUCA announcement, or the VUCA acronym. It's a leadership concept. VUCA is for the letter V, the letter U, the letter C, the letter A. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in this epidemic, this pandemic, all of those things are in play big time. So how do you use that to meet the challenge? Volatility is addressed with a vision. So putting a vision forward is extremely important to get people in place for saying, this is where we are going to be. And you hear effective leaders in this crisis talking about this vision. Vision might be all nurses will have the appropriate PPE at the right place at the right time for the right circumstance. That's a vision. How do we get there? U is addressed, or uncertainty is addressed by understanding. Being able to understand what is going on as best as you can and informing the public about this is really important for us to do as nurses, and it's important for us to help students go through this experience, faculty, and peers and practicing nurses. C, complexity is addressed with clarity. The clearer the statements that we make, the better. A is for ambiguity. That's addressed with agility. We have to be very agile in this situation to address it and to make changes. And your conference theme, revolutionary power, or our conference theme, because I'm a member of ENRS, is being revolutionary. And nurses are somewhat good at that, but not always, because we're the ones who do the structure, we're the ones that do the system, we're the ones that set up the protocol for quality. And so bucking all of those is really hard. And this pandemic is requiring that. And that includes everything from curricular changes to practicing guidelines in hospitals. And in a time when our science is ambiguous and uncertain, that makes us feel that, are we really doing the right thing? Thirdly, another thing that I have found very helpful from my emergency preparedness background, I started out as an emergency nurse. That's why I wanted to become a nurse when I was 12 years old. And I was in an ER for a broken arm. I just loved watching what was going on in the emergency department and decided that's what I would do. So while community and primary care have been an interest, my original interest, and always has been, is emergency preparedness. When we were at meetings at NYU with Shanghai, and then we have a campus at NYU Florence where Dr. Dixon has taught many times and knows a number of our Italian nurse peers, we realized that we had to ramp up how we were really managing students in those sites. And our global emergency advisor to NYU reminded us that in these situations, decisions are greatly helpful for clarity. And if your decision is 80% there, your decision is made. Don't try and be perfect in these times. You won't be able to be perfect every time. But if you don't make decisions and you stay in ambiguity and you stay in uncertainty, then all of the distractions start coming up. Well, what if this and what if that? I don't know if we should move. Should we go to this place? Should the students leave the dorm? Should the students stay in the dorm? So if 80% of your decision is made, your decision is made, and move on. And that has been very helpful to quiet a lot of uncertainty and what do we do and move forward. So I'm going to let you ponder those three thoughts. The idea that first, it's like a Kubler-Ross internal process to deal with this. Secondly, that it is a VUCA moment and use VUCA to deal with it. And thirdly, that it is a time when if your decision is 80% there, your decision is made, make the decision and implement it. You can always adjust it later. But if you don't make the decision, you continue sometimes with chaos. Now I want to talk. Sure.
Oh, no, we had a question, and
sure,
it
go ahead.
May fit well into this part. The VUCA model is one that I think that certainly can help us in our practice and our well as our leadership roles. And this question comes from a colleague in the New York community, and notes that we lost last night a nurse in
Right.
New York City who happens to be an NYU alum. But many know him, an assistant nurse manager at Mount Sinai West, where the nurses reported wearing trash bags because they did not have gowns. So this question asks, how can we move the president and the federal government, our other leaders, I would add also, to get the protective equipment, the PPE that we need, as well as the ventilators that we anticipate needing? And also along the lines with that, if you can speak to some of what the Academy is doing, because I think that is an important voice for nursing nationally as well as locally.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And yeah, that's what some of the things I was going to address next. So first, as I said, I was on one of the local TV New York City stations this morning about the Chaos Kelly, who we lost tragically yesterday. He was an alum of NYU and known to many of our faculty and colleagues. And I want to express condolences to his family and to our community for that loss. This isn't going to be the last. This is real. And this is going to be, it has already happened around the world, and it will continue to happen. I don't know the particular circumstances of Mr. Kelly's passing, and we don't know. But we will be losing loved ones to this pandemic, although we know the mortality rates and that it's certainly not as high as Ebola, but it's still a threat to us. In regards to support, I and the Academy have been very active in reaching out through policy and advocacy to leaders locally, leaders at the state level, and nationally. Many of our fellows are working at local levels, which is what many times needs to be done and is the most effective. First and foremost, we need to make sure that social distancing continues. I started with MSNBC pieces several weeks ago talking about social distancing and what it means, and it's real. And that was before commentators on TV were sitting apart. They were all sitting close together and getting their makeup done. And I went through the MSNBC studio early in the morning and was just demonstrating to them. They had Perel around, but saying, here are the things you need to do. The power of the voice of the nurse in that situation was remarkable. And we know that people listen to nurses, although we don't always get all the credit. But our voices at each stage of advocacy is heard and makes a difference. So at the American Academy of Nursing, if you go to our website and click press releases and click if you are a fellow or you're not a fellow, you can still go on and read about our advocacy work and everything that we've been doing with other colleague professional groups, the American Nurses Association, American Hospital Association, American Medical Association have signed on to letters for every aspect of what needs to be done nationally. We called for a meeting with Vice President Pence over a week ago after it was announced that he would be leading the efforts for the White House. And that meeting took place a week ago. And Suzanne Miyamoto was there for the American Academy of Nursing. The American Academy of Nursing, with the other nursing organizations, decided what would be each aspect of what each nursing organization would bring to the table. There were about 12 nursing organizations. And we didn't want to all say the same thing. So our three areas are, one, of course, keeping the frontline work and all nurses prepared with the right PPE and the right equipment to treat patients. Secondly, that we want to see testing done. Although in New York right now, testing is almost out the window. I mean, you just have to assume everyone is exposed to COVID. I mean, you need to know the most seriously ill people have the test, but once you reach this level of prevalence of the disease in the community, testing will help you know treatment, but you have to assume, one, there's community spread and everyone has it. So some of the testing, I think, is very important for nurses to explain, by the way. The difference between testing for surveillance and the difference between testing for disease. And I've explained that over and over again to public, and they find it very helpful. But that is something that the Academy has been pressing. And then thirdly, addressing the most vulnerable groups, who many of whom are in a communal living and aren't being recognized for their risk. So that would be people in prison, that would be people in long-term care, people in homeless shelters, and anything where we know group homes where people don't have either the ability to social distance or need support in that regard. So that has been the Academy's push, and then signing along with all of the other things, the Defense Production Act. I think the latest one is nationalizing the supply line. If you followed the pieces that I've done in the press, I have used the word logistics every single time I've mentioned this. First of all, where is the stuff and how do you get it from one point to the next? We don't have a national inventory. The business community is beginning to understand this issue and working with us, but it's the Defense Production Act that put the pressure on them. Even if it wasn't invoked, it put the pressure on them to start moving. Because nurses are trusted, that's what we've been doing. The states are very important. The New York State Department of Education, once Andrew Cuomo, several weeks ago, the governor of New York, declared that it is New York's in an emergency state. That flipped the New York State Education Department to reach out to all the schools of nursing and say they were willing to work with us on all sorts of adjustments to our curriculum to keep students moving forward and to graduate. I think now in states we're looking at licensing changes, temporary, or we're talking about how can we use the former graduate licensing where you can still have a job and practice prior to your NCLEX. And that may raise the hair on the back of a lot of our necks, but go right back to VUCA and right back to Kubler-Ross and understand that we've got to move forward faster with all of this. Our national accrediting nursing organizations need to understand that at advanced practice levels, we may need to adjust simulation for clinical hours to get the NPs and the midwives and the nurse anesthetists out there as soon as possible and not have a lag over the next 2 years because of limitations on what we've been doing. And we have seen excellent response from the American Association of Medical Colleges in this regard. I haven't seen that yet from our own advanced practice nurse credentialing bodies, and I've been asking them to recognize that we are in a very different situation. So we have to address things ourselves internally, as well as make sure that policy leaders are responding to us and making the decisions that need to be made. This is going to be messy. And what we have to understand in the American Academy of Nursing is that we are about policy and advocacy, but not politics. Other organizations will be involved in politics. And that's different than advocacy and policy. Politics and activism are important, and often we are members of groups that are activist and political. American Academy of Nursing is about policy and advocacy because we are the science leaders in nursing, the leadership and the innovators. So I'll take some more questions, Vicki. I think that would, I see we now have over 100 people.
We do, yes. Thank you. And we do have a number of questions, and I'm going to try to maybe categorize them. Mm-hmm. The first one of the questions that we're seeing has to do with students. I think you touched a bit on that, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more around how we can, let's see, where did this question go? How we can engage, what we can do with our students to have them, to prepare them to in our clinical roles, how we can best advocate, amplify our voices is, I guess, what this particular
amplify the voices of students
in our clinical, in our clinical roles as nurses.
Right.
We're so busy caring for our patients. How can we use our voices in some of these advocacy roles, especially related to looking for resources or supporting some of the initiatives that you've mentioned at the Academy?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we at the Academy have been getting calls, I'm sure other nursing organizations have been, from communities who are saying, how can we help to, you know, do you want us to sew masks in a sewing club and things like that? We have to use our science in those situations. I was talking to most of the chief nurses and gathering information in New York City, and people don't want homemade devices. But yet we have engineering and innovators. I had a call yesterday from the New York Academy of Science asking, what can we do to help move this forward and get it to the nurses? And I think you have to take each of it a step at a time to understand what's needed and what we can do. So first, advocate for nationalization of a supply chain. work with the governors and the local health department and the hospitals to understand what is it that they need and want at this time. I remember during Katrina, when I was at Penn, and I was Associate Dean for Practice and Community, and all the students wanted to get in cars and run down to New Orleans. And we were like, well, wait a second, lines are down, et cetera, et cetera. What can we do here? So it's the same thing. Look, find out locally what would be most helpful and address that. Secondly, we all know that this is a great time for learning. I met with our nursing representatives in our School of Nursing, and we are across the street from Bellevue Hospital. And we, in our conference room, are able to look at Bellevue out the window, as you know from NYU if you've been there. And at first, before the students and I even started talking, and I was feeling a little annoyed at the time when I shared that with the students, because we were getting ranges from I don't want to go to clinical to I do want to go to clinical, and it was an input time as a leader where you're just like, ugh. And I said, let's all walk over to the window before we begin this meeting, and let's look at Bellevue Hospital and recognize the history behind us for what has gone on in Bellevue since its founding, and it is the home of the first school of nursing in the United States. And let's reflect and talk about what diseases have they seen before, how have they responded, and now you as students are in this situation yourselves, and we haven't been here probably since 1918, and here you are. And then we had a whole discussion about what is it that they wanted to get engaged with. And a lot of it had to do with health education and public education. And while that may seem boring, but that is one of the best things we can do to keep people from ending up ill in the hospital and in the ICU, to practice social distancing first. And they have been, in my School of Nursing, we have, as I mentioned, a task force. I put students on the task force. And that was a great way for them to be engaged, listen to their voice, but also for them to learn, so that they're going to be entering, some of them still, and for many of you where you haven't seen the surge yet, but you will, be going through this experience. And there's nothing to prepare that's never been seen before. I was asked by my nephew, who teaches a 7th grade class, if I could answer some questions like this in a pre-recorded set of questions and send them to his class. And it was so poignant. Katie, one of the girls, wrote a number of questions, how long is it going to last and things like that. And at the end, she said, I apologize for so many questions, but I've never been through a pandemic before. And I was like, well, none of us have. But that innocent question really brings to the heart of what students are going through when we're preparing them. You have to know this, you have to know this, this is what you do. This isn't a time where we know what to do, and in all circumstances. So preparing them for that uncertainty, I think, is really key. And I can imagine how they're going to carry it through their career.
Thank you. Another a question, I know you have a very strong clinical background in caring for vulnerable populations and older adults. And so this question is around one of the most vulnerable populations I know that we see here in our region. And this attendee asks, the shutting down of public buildings have increased problems in our area for homeless that don't have shelter. Populations like this are particularly vulnerable and now don't have the access that they would typically have. Any suggestions on how we might encourage others to meet the needs of this vulnerable population that may be spreading the disease unintentionally? So again, in our clinical or advocacy role as educators, how can we help?
Well, I think as we've done with the Academy, is raise this point. We were the only group to raise this point to President Trump, that it's these groups. And Seema Verma, by the way, was in the room at that meeting. Seema Verma is the director of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So the Medicaid population is part of her portfolio. And I think driving it home to HHS, Azar, and herself that you have to not leave these groups out of the equation and identify what might need to be done. And I think that what we're seeing now in New York City is that many people who have limited social support, even if they're not homeless, but limited social support, limited information, are coming to the emergency department in droves because they don't know where else to turn. And that in turn is creating a huge backup in emergency departments and creating the need for that. So what we can do locally would be very important. And one of the great frustrations for all of us and for me is that we're often asked after the fact to help rather than helping to plan it ahead. So agitating for yourself to be on a committee locally or to be heard by decision makers in the cities where you live, the local health departments, the rural areas. Mary Wakefield, one of our esteemed fellows in the American Academy of Nursing, is very concerned about rural areas because those hospitals will get overwhelmed in a matter of a few hours. So what is it that we can do to speak up and stay with the message? Now, what can happen in advocacy is you can have too many messages. So if you're in a particular situation where you have a dissertation, you have expertise in a certain area because that's what you're studying, you stick with that. Just like we're always telling our PhD students to focus, focus, focus. You need to continue to focus. You're the expert in this, but stick with that and stick with that message. I think that's important because you could be all over the place and starting to get confused yourself as to where to go and what to do. Stick with one message, keep with it, and keep pushing it forward in whatever influence sphere you have in front of you.
Thank you. Another question, two questions that I think we can say are related. Thinking about the long-term implications of this global pandemic on the nursing workforce, certainly mental health and well-being of our workforce, and several attendees asked about the tension between the unavailability of PPE and tension nurses may feel as to whether they should work or not, going to work when they have symptoms, but unavailability of testing. So what do you think the long-term implications might be on the nursing workforce? And countering that, what are the potential opportunities? Should nurses or can nurses partner with engineers immediately to create prototypes? How can we be part of this design and solution at an innovation stage? Because we are, nurses are at the front line.
Well, you know, there's many things to unpack in that, those questions, which are very good. So I always go back to where is it that you can have influence and where is it that you can focus? If you start down one road and you're going to work with an engineer to craft this or that, don't also then try and be a public educator. Figure out where it is that your focus is going to be, and would it be helpful to get some information or work collaboratively with people who are going to help. There could be innovation in how to get messaging out for public health education. That is something that I've been trying to do. I think nurses are on social media right now more than I've ever seen in my career and on national media. We need to be there more. But right now is the time that they're coming to us. I've noticed some flipping in language of news media where it's always been doctors and nurses, doctors and nurses, doctors and nurses. And now I'm hearing nurses and doctors, nurses and doctors, because once the panic sets in, they realize you need to do that. So again, it's your focus of where it is you want to be. My focus has been advocating for nurses, using the opportunities that I have to get public information out there, and also about nurses, but about the public coming from a nurse. That is incredibly important. And so what innovations can you work with engineers to do that even better? Excuse me, my throat's dry. But then maybe you're a simulation teacher, and you can work with an engineer or a technologist that'll help you do sim in an even more creative way than you've been doing it. Maybe it is equipment. Maybe it is this a Canadian article from nurses that's been circulating about how you can convert one ventilator to support 4 patients at a time. It's a single study done in disaster preparedness with a shortage of ventilators, and are there areas, but not every nurse should be trying to figure that out. So again, figure out what it is that you can do in your particular area, and stick with that, and work with, if you're in schools of nursing, there's communication departments. If you don't have one in the School of Nursing, you have one in the university, and keep sending them information in 1 or 2 sentences about what it is that you're an expert in and can talk about.
Thank you. And another question, or more of a comment, and I'll add my thanks as well to this commentator. We appreciate your leadership and courage in this time, being the voice for nursing. Your voice is indeed powerful. Can you talk with us all a little bit more about this, the notion of profound sadness? It's important for us to, wherever we are, wherever we stand in our roles, to understand this, and many of us have experienced this as well. Understand that we've been impacted, and how can we work towards moving from sadness to advocacy?
Well, I don't know exactly how you move from sadness to advocacy, but it sort of happens, you know, like anything that happens in grief. But you know, the feeling, what I do for myself sometimes is I don't let myself feel those. Like as a nurse, I'm like, well, I got to be there. I got to do this. But you start to find that you can't quite pay enough attention, or you're just a little bit grumpy. You're snapping at friends or family members, and it's like, well, maybe I need to deal with something else. And putting yourself aside to whatever works for you. Is it meditation? Is it yoga? Is it going for a run? Is it laughing, watching comedy? Is it just binging and sucking your thumb? Is it, you know, what is it that helps you get through that, and give yourself time to do that, so that you get to the next part? People are going to suffer with PTSD on this. And that's very real. So right now we're in the action, and hospitals are setting up wellness situations for their staff. I remember during Hurricane Sandy, and this wouldn't necessarily apply in this situation, but there was a lot of massage giving who were undergoing so much loss at NYU Hospital. When they lost they had to leave their units for 59 days, and they lost that camaraderie of working together. And so that was open to them. Well, we can't get massages now, but we can do meditation, or we can do yoga. So I think that's very important to take the time out to do that. and get support. And as nurses, you know, there's a lot of ways to also laugh and give ourselves time to do the silly things that aren't laughing at others, but certainly are laughing at ourselves, or about the kind of predicaments you have at home, managing everything in new and different ways.
A question from another one of our attendees, and we're up to nearly 150 participants now.
Hello, everyone.
Dr. Selman Mark. So
congratulations, Vicki.
So we are, and our membership is diverse across multiple, many levels of career. And this question comes from someone who says, I'm not a decision maker, or if you're not a decision maker in your organization and you see something that impedes care, safety, or is perhaps inefficiently bureaucratic, how does one balance the decision of being responsible activist versus perhaps causing some distrust or violating the trust of an organization? So advice for how to, for maybe those of us on the early side of becoming advocates in this decision-making process of stepping up and speaking out.
Thanks, that's a great question. Well, one, you have power. I was thinking, well, I could also at the last minute flip this to my talk that I do on knowing your own power no matter where you are. And so your voice is powerful. You're powerful particularly if you're at the front lines right now. There is huge power in the people who are caring for patients. And so you bring facts to the fore repeatedly. You make your position that you want to take clear. You keep to that clear statement, and you base it on science or evidence, or the lack of science or evidence, and you be clear about it. What is not helpful, and all of us are seeing emails like this, what is not helpful is to be sarcastic, to be flippant, or to be disrespectful. And it's also not helpful to put 5 different things that you're trying to say in one message. So you may want to partner with others to say, here's a problem, how can we make this clear? Use a VUCA. I mean, if you open up, I found say, look, we are in a VUCA situation, and I'm noticing that this is very complex. How can we get better clarity on when we need to use what mask, when, and where? And I'm used to doing this way, but now you're telling me to do that way. Can we be more clear about that? And you know, you may have to do things differently, but how you understand that and then share that with others can be very important. And if you feel so frustrated and angry, and I certainly, you know, I found myself that way in a few times, and sent one email out to some colleagues at not in nursing, in an advocacy way on a Saturday morning, and realized, well, maybe I should have given them another hour to wake up. But I was particularly frustrated at that moment. I didn't make the message angry, but I realized, oh, sorry, take a deep breath, and but here's my point again. And then I'm sticking with that point. And I think that that's how you do it. But the other thing that isn't always helpful is putting so many people on a text or a email that it just goes out to a whole bunch of people, and you think, great, it's gone to the top. That's not going to be as effective. For example, getting to Seema Verma can be more effective than getting to other folks. Getting to the head of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Coordination an office that I used to be an advisor to, getting my message to those folks is going to change much more than getting a message even to Seema Verma. So it's thinking about where is the influence that you can make to get that change done. And maybe it's not sending it to the leader, but sending it or talking to the associate director of central supply. And that's a very important way of thinking about your leadership.
Thank you. And perhaps a final question. We're running towards the end of our time, but a final question for you. This is the year of the nurse and midwife. So I know as president of ENRS, I had wanted to talk about that, and we were going to think about that. So now our question is, how can we leverage this important time for our profession, for our discipline, as we address this pandemic? You've mentioned the number of resources, and we know the work that Dr. Miyamoto and others are doing and the Academy is doing. Advice for us as ENRS, how can we work with the Academy or other nursing organizations? How might we work with even the World Health Organization, et cetera, to strengthen our collective voice for action?
Well, I think that it's not so much how can we, it's that the pandemic is making this the year of the nurse. And think about flipping that in a concept of how to think about that. It's like we were, the International Year of the Nurse and Midwife was put together, and a lot of us were like, okay, it's Florence's 200th birthday. What do? We have this or we have that. We want to make sure the world recognizes that nurses need to be recognized and be at the table. Well, the pandemic has done that for us. So using this opportunity, even as tragic as it is going to be useful. And so the more we bring up, and this happens to be the International Year of the Nurse and Midwife, and as you see, nurses are critical. Now, the thing that I think is very important is not so much that we are, but why are we critical? And people sort of always know this, but the more you can get through to people, things like, well, why is the nurse that important? Well, you're on the front line is being used all the time. Well, what does front line mean? And I've been trying to get in messages like, frontline means that we're the only ones there 24/7. No other professional group is with you in that IC 24/7 but us. And if you repeat that over and over again, it really sinks into people's minds. Secondly, what is it that that nurse is doing with people 24/7? And this ventilator. And it's like, well, the nurse, I've been getting a lot of questions. Well, the nurse, does every nurse know how to work a ventilator? Or is it just ICU nurses? And this technology is, the more people we need ventilators, let's unpack for people what that means and how advanced our knowledge is and how we are the ones, along, of course, with respiratory therapists, who are using the technology and understanding how to balance the fluid and electrolytes that are going into the patient, managing the mechanisms to keep the diaphragm paralyzed while we do this and support. And it's the nurse making all those intricate decisions. And the more you sort of just tell people it's the nurse doing that with their education, the more I think that people will increasingly understand that when you're planning, you need to have the nurse in the room. And the other Vicki knows that I'm always using, because we're in New York, is nurses are in the room where it happens. And use Hamilton. Javier Munoz, who is the understudy for Lin-Manuel Miranda, is an alum of NYU, and he loves nurses. So he's been active this. So you just say, well, as it's in Hamilton, nurses are in the room where it happens, and we need to remain there. So use phrases like that always when you're talking to people, and it helps them understand why why nurses will always be there for them in the room where it happens.
Eileen, thank you so much. We're so appreciative of your time with us and your willingness to join us at this really important time for each and every one of us, for our region and for our profession. Thank you for jumping in, for being the voice of nursing. It's just, I've truly enjoyed our time together, and I can tell from the list of questions that everyone else has as well. So thank you for joining us. We look forward to being able to see you in person, hopefully sooner than maybe we think. But and we'll see you hopefully at ENRS in Philadelphia, where the entire membership can thank you in person.
Looking forward to that.
Thank you, Eileen. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Congratulations again.
Wonderful. Okay, so we'll go back to, I have just a couple of housekeeping points for the rest of our meeting. And we're going to be having a break in just a few minutes. The session will close, and at 10 o'clock, we will open our next session, which is Funding Opportunities, Pearls, and Pitfalls. And then you'll see from the schedule, every hour there is a 45-minute session, and each session you'll need to, zoom back in on, rejoin, and then at the end of the session you'll be asked that important CEU question that will, give you your CEUs for the session that you attended. And then I urge you, please join us back again at 3 p.m. for the all-member meeting. This is an important meeting that we will update you on what's going on with the board and the organization as a whole, as well as the transition from our leadership teams. So our president will take office, etc. So I want to thank you all for being really just so supportive of our conference, for joining in. There are so many questions that came through, and I'm very pleased with just how everyone has been able to support us and join us. And a couple of questions, we're in the room where it happens. You're exactly, Dean Sullivan Marks certainly has said that, and we at ENRS in our region have experienced that. So I urge you all to continue to be in the room where it happens, and that could be in a hospital room, in a community, to advocate, to take from Dean Sullivan Marks's comments, the importance of nursing. Thank you all for your attention, for joining us today, and we look forward to you joining us again at 10 a.m. Thank you very much, and I will sign off for now. I'll see you all at 3 p.m. Bye.